Welcome to the Modern Pet Retailer, where independent pet retailers can solve problems together within our pet businesses. Today, we're talking very uncomfortable conversations when it comes to either firing employees, working on performance issues, and managing that. Most small business owners avoid these conversations because you build these relationships with your employees, and it's no fun to have to tell them or send them on their way if it's in the best interest of your business. So, a lot of people avoid these conversations until the problem is escalated and it's either affecting your team or affecting your business. But I think that nobody got into pet retail or the pet industry specifically because they want to have these conversations. They want to get in because they genuinely care about people and their pets, and that involves our employees as well. But avoiding these conversations, like I said, will just compound and not protect anyone. It just protects the wrong behavior at the expense of your best people. So today we're going to be talking about the performance evaluation process, how to set clear expectations for your employees when they are underperforming so that they have clear guidelines on what they need to do next to improve, how to have tough conversations around performance issues, and then also if we need to offload these people into whatever their next pathway is and get them onto something that's going to be better for them. So, Dave, you've been around in business for a very long time. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people come and go. What's your take on why most business owners wait so long to have these conversations?
I think at the most basic, it's the known versus the unknown. Even if we have a bad actor, or maybe it's just somebody who is underperforming, trying to do just enough to not get fired, but all the way up to bad actors like stealing or harassment. It's status quo. This is the way things are. They're a warm body. They're here. And I think the fear from the manager owner perspective to initiate these rough conversations is no matter what, not only the conversation going to be painful because I have to specifically address somebody to their face, what's going on, and tell them they no longer work here. Even if it's not that severe, even if it's a coaching, I think in general, we tend to feel bad about hurting someone's feelings or being very direct. And then what if they take it the wrong way? What if they don't like me? So there's this kind of underlying discomfort or even fear saying status quo is sufficient. And what's on the other side of the conversation is an unknown. And this is like a natural human mental position, is to not to avoid the unknown, right? Hey, we're inside the cave. Everything's safe, even if it's not great. And then outside the cave is unknown. There's lots of danger out there. So I think that's the absolute core of people's discomfort with hard conversations all the way up to firing. So I think this is where there's just a natural resistance, and it's okay. It, some people have a predisposition to just moving forward and taking the bull by the horns and just going after it. But that's a very rare personality type. And you have to have a clear vision. We've mentioned in the past our core values, and you've mentioned today protecting the best employees. If you set yourself up in that mentality, it's a little bit easier because you have a forward moving goal to address and less focused on the individual's behavior, loyalty or trust, or the difficulty of having these conversations because you're focused on something bigger. But yeah, I've seen everything from problems with family members to people stealing from us, employees that were cliquey and employees that harassed other employees. I've seen the gamut. And honestly, when all of those conversations are still hard, but when you focus on the core mission of your business and you frame it by protecting your best employees and the long-term success of your business, you put those conversations into a larger perspective, and it does make it easier.
From your personal experience, what's probably one of the least favorite conversation types that you've had in your experience?
I'm more of a numbers person and less of a people person. So many of those conversations can be difficult. I also tend to be very direct when I do have conversations. So a lot of times it can be taken as harsh, direct, curt, it can be taken the wrong way. Firings really are the hardest because ultimately there's a separation, and you might like the person from a personality level, but understand that they're just not the right personality, attitude, or process for your business. Honestly, when it comes to violating our core values, which are lived and observed, not aspirational, about honesty and integrity and treating others with respect, it becomes a lot easier when you have a bad actor because you can point to something that not only hurts the business, but hurts you personally. People are dishonest and stealing. It becomes a lot easier to fire somebody if they're really violating to that level of code or they're hurting someone else with the harassment. But I think the firings are the hardest conversations because it's the end of something. You're going to change this person's life, possibly, hopefully for the better through a learning environment or just saying, hey, the behaviors that you exhibited here are just not allowed and generally not allowed anywhere else. Go move on and figure yourself out. You hope that they do better somewhere else, but it's not your job to fix somebody. And that's over time what I've come to in my mind. That doesn't mean don't coach, right? It's really important to coach and teach and bring someone up to speed. But at the end of the day, if they're not going to accept your coaching, it's just not your job to fix somebody. And you don't have time for that. You have to focus on your best employees. You have to focus on finding the next best employee and how you're going to hire. So I would say for sure that because of the finality of it, firing is the hardest conversation.
It's not something I ever want to happen, but it does happen, like, when you talk about ethics violations or things that violate your core values, so stealing, lying, dishonesty, stuff like that. Those I don't feel uncomfortable with at all. It's clear this is what we laid out when you started. Obviously, you violated that, especially if it's police actionable type thing. Like, I don't want those situations to happen for our business, but those are the least uncomfortable ones for me because it's written in black and white what we expect of behavior and what is not tolerated here. It's always the ones that are just like you could tell the person's trying and it's either just falling short, maybe for their own personal limitations or something. Those are I just feel a pit in my stomach and I'm like, this is gonna really suck. But we gotta get it done because it's either dragging the team back or it's not moving something forward that we need to go forward with. But firing, it's not fun. Definitely gets easier, I feel like. I've only been doing it for 5 years. But like the first one, sweating through it, you're like, this person's gonna hate me forever. And then you find out they move on, you kind of follow up with them. It worked out and your business kept going. And then by the 12th one, you're like, it's not the end of the world. It's like, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. So it kind of takes some of that gut wrenching feeling out of it. But before we get to that point, we want to try and have cadenced performance reviews and check-ins regularly. So we want to talk about check-ins and the performance reviews now. A lot of I think small businesses, and this is something that I was definitely guilty of, was doing performance reviews once a year and then not really doing check-ins. And then when I had a subpar employee or somebody that was falling below bar, I was like, why aren't they getting better? It's because I was never telling them where the bar was and how to achieve and get over that and help the team until there was like a problem. So definitely take some ownership of that. If you have a problem employee, but you only check in with them once a year, it's definitely not going to get better with only checking in with them once a year. And also, you don't want your performance reviews to be a surprise. I try to give everybody like a 2-month heads up of, hey, we're going to be talking about these things. And all of our employees know exactly what's on that review. It doesn't really change. It might change in context, but they're given that months in advance of, we've just reworded this. This is what this means to help articulate these points. But if an employee hears something negative for the first time in a formal review, you've already waited too long. So you want to address everything so that by the time you get to that review, we have a clear evaluation of we were here and now we're going to be here, whether that's plus or minus.
It's a funny story. A friend of mine who has a law practice, very system and structure oriented around their training and around their business and operations and top level performance. Everybody in the office does a really good job from how they pick up the phone to how they answer emails, how they do intakes for the lawyers. But he was complaining at one time about intake phone calls not being handled as per his format, his instruction. And really the question becomes not only did you train them, he does, but when's the last time you trained them? So like skills that we're teaching people are perishable. So when you have employees in front of you that are not doing things the way that you expect them, we can't just teach them once and let them roll for 6 months, a year. we have to keep bringing it up. And that this is where I think Tiff is talking about like these interim conversations is not only coaching, but retraining, like retouching our systems and saying, hey, I noticed that you're doing it this way. We expect it this way. One, you can ask them why, but also we can revert back to our original training and say, we've designed this for a very specific purpose. And these are the reasons that we want you to do the things the way that we do them. So it's, even if you have people straying from your expectations, to Tiff's point, we have to take personal responsibility for that and say, what is within our systems that we're not doing right? Or have we retouched on the training on a consistent enough basis so that we can have those expectations? Skills that people are not accustomed to are perishable. They go away over time. It's not only these uncomfortable conversations, but we have to look at how good is our training? How often do we do it? How often do we ask our employees to review it in a positive note? So it doesn't come down to these, gotcha, you're doing the wrong thing. But it's funny, it happens everywhere and it happens at the highest levels. So it is important to touch base way more often.
Yeah, and often when I do find I'm touching base with an employee because they're either underperforming or not performing to expectations, it's I was only showed this once and I have to take ownership of that fact and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. This is something that might require more than 1 or 2 times to see or at least when you do see it that once, follow up 6 months, you might need to kinda see it again if it's especially if it's a scenario that doesn't happen very often." So taking ownership of that. When you do have those cadences, it's important because it is very easy to forget, especially when you have 15 employees and maybe 5 of them kind of come in around the same time. You're like, all right, definitely touched on this once or twice with this one, but maybe I didn't hit it the second time with somebody else. And it can kind of get difficult when you have people staggered, hired to kind of remember. So definitely if you can set up some form of internal CRM, we use Homebase as ours. It tells us I can set it up for notifications on when you need to check in with employees is what I think it's called. I don't think they call it performance reviews, but just check-ins. And I can make notes. So it's, hey, I need to follow up to make sure they retain this raw training or follow up that they need to do this type of training. We definitely setting up some kind of internal CRM for just your employees outside of your customers to use and keep track is very helpful. Let's see. So when we get back to reviews, you can set your review system up. I like having personally some kind of formal document that kind of rates each behavior. And since we don't have too many hard data points that we collect on our employees, because we don't have sales policies, we don't have new customer policies like creating new accounts. So it becomes very hard to judge and aid kind of behaviors because most of it is on our core value system. How well do you treat customers on a regular basis? How do you answer the phones and all these things? But trying to find tangible touch points within soft skills like customer service. That way you can articulate them. Do you answer the phone? The according to Braxton's policy, if you refer to our employee handbook, the Braxton's policy is answering with your name, who, telling who they're calling with, name who they're calling with. Gonna forget them all, and then how to properly just engage people on the phone. Those are the only two. I don't know why I'm blanking on the whole conversation, but do they answer the phone like that in a customer service oriented way? Do they greet customers at the door in that same formal, not necessarily formal greeting, but in a friendly greeting? Are they engaging customers at the counters with the same kind of, are you guiding customers through the entire transaction? Are you engaging them with good body language? All these things are observable traits. So it can be hard to articulate, yes, you created 32 new accounts, which is a hard number. It can be very difficult to measure these types of things, but trying to get as specific as possible will help you with that. Because then when you say this person's clearly not engaging a customer at the register, like the way we would hope, you can articulate underperforming and then address that with the person. If yes, you have your arms crossed, you turn away from the customer, you're eating or drinking during a transaction. It's easier to find specific reasons of why you demoted a specific action towards a core value. And then we do have a couple of hard metric ones within our system. So we do track new customer accounts. We don't have a minimum. We just have a goal we set for every single person. And that's basically helping them gain the skills of articulating programs and sales is kind of how I view it. Because if you can pitch a program that only benefits the customer, you should be able to learn how to sell other things. So we have that metric. We have on time metric, which is a pretty low bar, but at an entry level position, you do have to have that kind of metric on time. And then just sales participation. If you work 4 days a week and we see a certain number of sales just at the register, it could indicate that you're hiding from the register or prioritizing something else and then just needing to be a balanced employee. So we look at that number. Again, nothing that negatively impacts them, just things that might be tall tale signs of you might not be in the right place at the right time, or you might be prioritizing the other things. We also have a cleaning list that is graded every day by our team leads. That report comes back to me. So if they get 1 out of 5, 5 being great, 1 being your section looks terrible, I can address that with them. If you have a lot of cash register sales, but your cleaning list is like terrible. So either you're prioritizing the registers and not balancing your time with the cleaning list, or vice versa, your cleaning list is 5s and you have very low sales, you might be spending too much time on your sections and not enough time at the registers, which would then usually show with your teammates getting alternate scores because they either have to cover something in that absence. So all of it's a balancing game. All of it's more conversational than anything. The paper just kind of helps guide the conversation and then give me actionable steps of just saying, let's refer to the customer service at the register. If somebody is using poor body language and crossing their arms, stepping away, if I just say that you have bad customer service at the register, that's very hard for somebody to understand. And it also sounds like you're attacking the way that they treat people. Whereas you say, if you cross your arms, you don't smile, you don't say, have a good day. These are all things that make other people uncomfortable or turned off to how you're presenting yourself or the business. You can know to work on those things personally. So it kind of gives that like a good feedback loop.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to continually push from subjective to objective, right? From abstract to concrete. So even if your core values are a bit abstract or attitudes are abstract, you have to push them into the objective. That's a really good point, Tiff, because when you have KPIs and metrics for your front staff, like you said about so many transactions or so many new customers, yeah, they're objective. They're inherently objective. You can measure. But if you say good attitude, it's inherently subjective. What does it mean? That's a really good point to suggest that we look for specific behaviors. Again, body postures, like you described. We can't coach a bad attitude, but we can coach a smile, crossed arm. These things are so no matter what we're doing and what we're coaching for, pushing towards objectivity, towards concrete is way easier. We can't measure subjective. We can measure objective. I think that's a really good point that you made.
Yeah. And when we hire a new person, we start with showing them this piece of paper that shows all the things we're looking for and what makes a good employee and what success looks like here. Usually about 30 days, they'll see that and then kind of know what that they should be working on personally. And then 90 days is kind of when we give them a first formal grading on that. And hey, these are some of the things I'm noticing you're doing really well. These are some of the things we'd love for you to work on. And then if there's anything that's hard stop, try to catch it before that 90 days. But make sure they at least know about those hard stop behaviors. So you're like, you can't answer the phone with just saying, "Hey," or "What's up?" You can't just not introduce yourself. So they need to hear about that before that 90 days. So that way when you check in, they'll be like, "Hey, I appreciate you not answering the phone like that." That way the customer actually knows who they're talking to or that they called the right place. So that's like our formal cadence when people first start. And then every 6 months we do that, at least a formal check-in with employees.
When we talk about these touch points that are outside of the formal sit downs, it, it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be half an hour or even 15 minutes. It literally can just simply be a quick conversation of 5 minutes. So if you're thinking, yeah, I've got a bunch of employees, how am I going to schedule all this time? It doesn't have to be all this time. It can be quick. How you feeling? Where you at? This is what's going well. This is what we have to work on. It doesn't have to be super formal. It should just be, let's touch base. Let's sit down for 5 minutes. And that way, no matter if you have 2 employees or 100 employees, if you're getting it on the schedule and you sit down for a couple of minutes, it saves you a ton of time in the long run. And it sets the tone for the sit down 15-minute, half an hour, deeper conversations.
I can always tell when I'm getting outside that cadence because then when I do have to talk to somebody, whether it's good or bad, You almost always have to preface with it, I need to see you upstairs in my office. It's not bad or it's not good. Like you almost have to pretext the conversation so that the employee's not super anxious as they walk the stairs to our office. So I can always tell when I'm like slacking on that and I'm like, okay, I clearly need to meet with people more often and for good reasons and just check-ins because they're just getting anxious walking behind me to my office. But let's talk about we have a behavioral issue, and we're just gonna talk about outside of ethic things. If you have somebody in your building that's stealing, lying, or violating your code of ethics, they just need to go. This is gonna be those conversations of performance specifically. So the goal of the performance conversation is just to change behavior, not punishment. It's not venting. We're not trying to prove a point, not trying to alienate this person or feel bad for the behavior. We just want to correct it. So we want to be, like I said earlier, specific with the behavior, avoiding language like, you always do this, or I had another employee tell me you do this kind of thing, trying to be as specific as possible. Explain the impact of the behavior. So if you answer the phones and you don't say your name, you don't say who you're calling with, the customer doesn't know if they called the right person. They don't know who to talk to if they get disconnected. Explaining the impact of that behavior, being clear of the expectations going forward. You don't want to be vague. You say, this is what we say when we answer the phone, and being specific. And then confirming that they understand and ask if they have anything else they needed. Because sometimes when I explain things, I'm like, it makes sense to me. And it came out and it was just gibberish to somebody else. So always following up with people and just be like, does that make sense? Can you reiterate what I want you to do? If it's something that you need them to physically show you, like literally have them pretend that somebody's calling and answer the phone type thing, just so that you're 100% sure. And that when they leave here, if they don't fix that behavior, you'd be like, we definitely covered what the good behavior looks like versus the bad behavior. Because I always feel like when I'm like, I don't know if they got that conversation, and then I still see it follow on, the only person I could blame is myself because I didn't make sure that they got it before they left the room.
Yeah, I like that idea of a quick role play and reiterating in their words what they heard you say, because that brings the conversation along so that you can refine it before they leave the room. I think that's a really important point right there because yeah, we know what we're thinking, but unless we can communicate it clearly in words, they're not going to get it. And we see this all the time. Oh, I said this. No, you didn't. Oh, all right. Maybe you just didn't get it. So that back and forth with either role playing or just a call back to say, all right, this is what I believe I'm explaining. How would you put it in your own words? Really good way to anchor it, to anchor the behavior so they know that they understand, but also that you believe that they understand, that they reiterated back to you what was actually your point.
Yeah, and if you feel uncomfortable before having that conversation, that could be a tall tale sign that you're concerned about the coachability of that person. I know, Dave, you've talked about coachability in some of the other episodes, but what are some of the biggest indicators you think that somebody might not be coachable, that they might need to be moved through the process of basically the next step of termination?
Yeah, they're the obvious signs, right? People who respond as if they know everything, right? There's a psychological metric, soft metric called Dunning-Kruger, and it's basically people who think they're a 9 or a 10 are often worse than people that are like rate themselves as a 5, 6, or 7. And basically, it's a mentality of I'm at this high level. I don't need more information. But if you are rate yourself as a 5, 6, 7, you're oftentimes a better performer than those people that rate themselves are a 9 or a 10 because it means you're coachable. It means you're always looking for more information, how to get better. So that's one of the most obvious things that stands out when people are either very dismissive or talk about poor posture towards customers, but poor posture in your conversation. They're not attentive, their defensive body language, they're verbally saying, oh, I got it. I got it. I got it. I understand. Versus maybe ask questions. "Oh, I'm not really clear what exactly you're saying I should be doing." So it's more difficult sometimes when they could have put on a face of interest, but then they turn around and don't do that behavior. That's a little, I wouldn't call it malicious, but it's a little more subversive where they're like, oh, absolutely. I understand exactly what you're saying. And they'll repeat it back to you and good to go. And then they go back into the environment. Maybe they're even good for a week because they know that you're watching, but then they revert back to their old behavior. And you're like, all right. So There are obvious people, again, extremely dismissive, not receptive. Then there's those people that think they know it and they don't need to learn it. Those are pretty easy to spot. And it's the people who agree, put on good behavior for a week, and then revert. That you got to get back at those conversations again as quick as you can, because this is an indication of a person that's not coachable, but they're more than happy to say what you want them to hear. I would definitely, one, like we said, the most poor person is the person that's overt about it is pretty easy to tag. And we know that they're not coachable. We're probably going to move them out quickly. The person that's coachable is asking really good questions, staying engaged, really wants to be there and wants to improve. And they're saying it. The hardest person is the person that appears to agree, knows they don't want to get fired. So they're going to smile and nod and improve their behavior for a short period of time. Those are the ones that can drag on for months, but they're probably never going to get better. They're just going to keep reverting.
Yeah, something that I think I don't know if it comes from you. I just learned it from you, but you discussed GWC, gets it, wants it, and the capacity to do it. Can you say where that came from and where you take that from here?
Yeah, I think this is originally from EOS, the meeting cadence and system that we use. And for anybody who's interested, it is a very good business process, entrepreneurial operating system. Look it up. It's very deep, and you need someone who is a well organized individual to be your integrator, worth reviewing and seeing. Even if you don't implement it, they have a lot of good material. Before I had heard there, once it gets it, has the capacity to do it, is I used to say for people that were operating below expectation, below par, my mentality was either they don't understand it or they don't want to do it. So this is the negative side of that. And neither of those answers are good, right? If they don't have the capacity to do it and which means they simply can't even learn the skill because they're not capable or they don't want to. This is attitude. Those two are absolute negatives and those people have to go. The positive side of that is they get it. This is your values. They're on board. They agree with the mission of the business and they want to do the best thing. They want it, right? They're really engaged and they're showing up. They're interested in learning more. They're asking you for information. They're doing information on their own. And obviously then they have the capacity to do it. They have the intelligence and the basis for it. So that's a really good point, Tiff. And again, I think that came from EOS, but this goes from your basic front staff all the way up to any sort of managers or people that are engaged in different types of work within your business. Because even at, front staff is such an important position, but from a skill level, it's generally not. So the capacity just has to be simply that you're able to walk and lift things. You can carry things out. You have good verbal skills for communication, and then capacity to learn information that you want to teach them, like nutrition and stuff like that. Then the question becomes, and let's assume they have the capacity. The question is, do they get it? Do they understand the reasons that your business operates in the way that it does? And in our case, we love to have a highly educated front staff so that our customers can trust us, that we're going to give them good information. So knowledge is a big thing for us. Do the front staff get that? Do they like, all right, this is a really good way to run your business. We understand it. And then do they want it? Are they soaking up the training that you're giving them? Are they asking you for more information when they run into a question that a customer had that they didn't have the answer to? Maybe are they looking up information on their own just because they want to get better? And this is your A player personality. And these are the type of people you want to find, you want to recruit, you want to hire. They will leave if you do not train them or treat them well, because they're good people. They're curious. They're always looking forward. So giving them a good environment and giving them a good reason to stay through those touches and those training moments, both in the coaching sessions like we're talking about today, but really in the long-term training, like giving them nutritional information, giving them resources, and letting them know that you're going to keep pushing the information that way.
If you find yourself being uncomfortable with performance conversations, Just remember that a well-run performance conversation is one of the most respectful things that you can do for an employee. It tells them that you care enough to be honest, and instead of just quietly writing them off, like, you could just let them go depending on what state you work in without having any kind of disciplinary action of, "Hey, it's just not working." But if you show that you care, you're like, "I want you to do better here. I want you to be successful here because I see potential in you." Having these conversations are super important, and it just helps protect your business as well. So let's say we've gone through this performance cadence and we've tried to correct some of these behaviors and we need to have more of an official statement, especially if you work in a, or you own your business in a state that you have to have documentation in order to let somebody go. Keeping your disciplinary actions clear and consistent. If you have a late policy on an employee, but you have a longer standing employee that is late on a consistent basis, but they've been there longer, you feel less inclined to punish them for that versus in a new employee that might be showing up late. You still have to discipline them in the exact same way according to your documentation or your policy. Keeping it consistent across the board. Again, just protecting yourself legally, but it's very difficult when you have those relationships to maybe treat longer standing employees differently than somebody that might be on the newer scale. Having your disciplinary actions documented is important. So we have a handbook that says if you violate any of these rules, basically it's a verbal warning, which is kind of what we just addressed as performance review, and then a written, and then termination, maybe a second written on non-ethics type violations. I think there's room for 2 written documents, but I usually only go with 1 because once you get to that first one, you've already should have tried to address the problem by that point.
And I think you mentioned it, but I think it's worth digging a little bit deeper. When we talk about a verbal coaching, it's verbal to the employee, but it is documented internally. So the date and time, the conversation, the outcome is all documented. So we can't just jump in, think verbal, written, final as literally, it's just verbal. I told them, but really it's, we sat down, had the conversation. We were very clear about it. And then as a business, we documented it. So I know you mentioned that, but I think it's because it's called a verbal. I didn't want anybody overlooking how important that is. And we're in Pennsylvania, we're a free to work state. Basically, you can be let go for any reason at all or no reason at all. Just, hey, you're not on the schedule anymore. See you. Have a nice day. But we don't want to do that because that's just not good for your business. It's not good for us from a learning perspective and a structure perspective. And it's not good for the employee. But just wanted to hammer home that point that all of these things are documented, even if the employee at that time doesn't have to sign off on it.
Yeah, and I usually reference when we get to the next stage each date, basically. So like you said, the verbal coaching is a date, time, conversation. And then when I do the written statement, it references that we addressed this 30 days ago. Ideally, you fix the problem in 30 days. It didn't get fixed. And now we're having this conversation. And then that written statement also says what the timeline is for you to fix that behavior, usually significantly shorter, like a 2-week window. And then the termination letter also references the written and then also references the verbal. Again, we just keep that documentation just in case, but it makes it a lot clearer when you be like, we never talked about this. When you get to a written disciplinary action, you're like, we actually talked about it on this date. You were here. We had that conversation. So it just protects you and makes it clearer as well. Because like you said, if you didn't check in with them at the end of that conversation, maybe they didn't realize the conversation you were having it was a performance issue type thing. If you don't check in and be like, do you know what I want you to improve on? If they're just like, we never discussed that, or we kind of talked about it, but no, that was actually, we needed this behavior fixed. It wasn't just noticing it. It was, we need the behavior fixed. So just protect yourself. And then again, it makes the conversation a lot less uncomfortable when you know that you've properly documented it. Let's see.
Yeah, I think too is two things on that is I like the idea is what you're saying is bringing back up the previous conversation with specific details is very powerful because when someone knows that you have all the information, they're less likely to be waver about it or try to change the conversation. Oh, yeah, you're giving them the date, you're giving them the day, you're giving them the time, you're giving them the conversation, you're giving them the expected outcomes. And they can't not agree with you because they were in the room. But if you don't give them the details, they might be like, yeah, like Tiff said, oh, it wasn't a big deal. Or, oh, I didn't know we were actually talking about getting fired. The other thing I will point out is Whether or not it's a legal issue is state unemployment. Again, in Pennsylvania, I can speak to, I can't speak to other states, but they tend to favor the employee. So having this documentation post termination, if in the next several years that employee goes for unemployment, the unemployment office will call you for an audit and basically ask for, did they, did you lay them off? Did they quit? Were they fired? And you pull up your documentation, say, oh, they were fired. This is the process of firing. These are the reasons they were fired. Unemployment office is going to judge it the way that they're going to judge it. It's irrelevant. But when they come back to you 18 months later, asking for your unemployment insurance to pay them some money to unemployment, it's good to have the details. So this documentation, can't say enough how important this documentation is.
And Dave, we've talked a lot in this series about how to properly protect your best employees. And can you speak to what happens to your best employees if you're inconsistent with the performance issues and handling them inconsistently?
Yeah, it's a massive morale harmer when you say you expect something. I can't remember who said it, but it's something along the lines of you don't get what you expect, you get what you tolerate. So you can have all the written documentation, you can have your core values, you can have your mission, you can have your beliefs, and you can operate at the highest level, being a good example. If you tolerate bad actors, and again, this could be habitual lateness or occasional bad attitude. It doesn't have to be the serious stuff. It can just be someone who doesn't get along with the other employees, someone who disappears off the floor more often than they should, someone who's going to the bathroom 30 times a day. What happens is that your best employees notice that, and you are tolerating behaviors that violate your expectations. You can't go back to them and say, oh, this is what we expect. Nope, sorry. This is what you tolerate. The other side of that is, so you yourself are actually damaging, you're harming your best employees because you told them you had high expectations. They are performing at the highest level of expectation, your best employees, and everything's rolling along nicely. And then you have someone who has slipped, who's showing bad habits, poor behaviors, bad attitudes. Your best employees will probably still operate at a high level, but they will become more and more concerned about your honesty towards your core values, your honesty towards your expectations. They're going to notice that you're tolerating behaviors that don't stand up to your own expectations. And this is what harms morale. The other side of it is when you have a bad actor in the store and as an owner or manager, you're hesitant to fire that person, to move them out into a place that they can find their own way. When you do ultimately let them go, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like a weight lifted. And your best employees, yeah, maybe you have 6 employees and one's a bad actor. Having 5 good employees is way better than having 5 good employees and a bad employee. It's like that bad employee is actually a negative one, right? So you actually have 4 good employees because that bad employee is taking up so much energy across the good employees that you're suffering. You just don't know it. And when you get rid of them, everybody's happier, everybody's calmer, everybody's more clear thinking, everybody trusts you more because now you've shown that you don't tolerate the bad behaviors. And it can have long-term effects when you don't prove out the bad stuff. And you'll have such a positive effect when you do. And it starts with the coaching that Tiff said. It's not just about termination, but it's about moving in as quickly as you can to coach the bad behaviors out of someone who's honestly interested in getting better. And it's about moving people out of your business who don't have a good interest. But the negative impact on good employees cannot be overstated. It's a bad aura, it's a bad energy, and it sucks the wind out of everybody. And I don't feel so good going to work. So it spreads quickly and it spreads far. And you'll see it if you have someone in your business right now and you just start today and you say, all right, this is good. I'm going to coach them on these 3 things that I've known for months that are going bad. And I'm going to verbal it and I'm going to document it and I'm going to explain why the behaviors are not acceptable. And then you're going to move them through to, hey, you have to correct these within a short period of time. And then you sit them down and they don't do it. You move them out. You will notice an uplift in the energy in your store. And it's going to be better for your best employees. It's going to be better for you. It's definitely going to be better for your customers.
Yeah. So if you don't have any kind of system in place for this type of documentation, something simple as Google Drive, Google Docs, it's all you kind of need to get started. Or if you have an internal HR system that you can use. But I would definitely start today on documenting it if you haven't already, just because it's something super easy. I used to write these documents and they were probably less than stellar, and then AI comes out and now they look a lot more formal that they don't necessarily need to, but I appreciate having AI rewrite it because it's definitely helps get it out of my tone of voice, which I know is very biased to the way I think and the way I speak. So I love having AI rewrite these so that it's clear and probably a lot more readable and easy to understand from anybody's perspective. But just start today. Something simple, Google Docs, Google Drive, organize it. All we have is simply each employee has their own folder and their performance reviews go in this, any kind of written verbal statements, any kind of doctor's notes. They're just all folders. And then if anybody gets moves on, termination, anything like that is a separate folder. And we just drop their folder into that one. And that's just how it's organized. Super simple. And then we make certain documents like the performance reviews are shareable to their personal email so they can always reference them and print them out if they need it for any reason. Let's see.
Yeah. And I want to make a good point is like, start it today, even if you don't have any coaching to do, right? Because you need to set the basis to say, okay, this person was hired 5 years ago and we generally talk once a year. You don't have to go backwards and fill all that in, but you'll want to project forward and put that on your calendar. Oh, I know that I haven't talked to them in 6 months. Let's bring it forward to a 6 month sit down instead of a 1 year sit down. So whatever that looks like is trying to get as much documentation and scheduling so that you know when's the next time in the future that I need to have a sit down conversation with them.
All right. And the final kind of conversation, the actual firing, how to do it with clarity, how to do it with compassion. Because sometimes when it is not ethics based, it can be very difficult conversation because it could just be a personality fit. Like you said, could be their capacity to do it. And then you have to admit to that person, it's just, I don't know if you're capable of doing this. And that's a very hard conversation to have because you're basically telling them they just are not up to snuff. But like I said, most people wait too long to have this conversation and like you have the employees feeling it. You just need to get it done, rip the band-aid off. The cost is almost always higher than longer you wait. Like you said, to your culture, your best employees, to your customers, even firing is not necessarily failure. It's keeping the wrong person too long, which is failure. And like I said, it could just bring down your entire team. So Dave, can you go over what you believe are immediate termination type acts?
There's the obvious ones, any sort of like behavioral attributes like aggression or harassment, people that don't respect other people's person, their feelings, whatever. They don't have to be like soft, mushy, but if they just, I think a general lack of respect, I would fast track termination. Then again, these are the things that what you do sometimes you do all the time. So any sort of dishonesty, even on a smaller level, not necessarily immediate termination, but it's something that you have to be very observant of. Somebody who is slightly dishonest is still dishonest, right? So again, there's the obvious ones like outright aggression or obvious theft. These things are just obvious, right? You're going to terminate them immediately because you're at a higher risk and it's extremely obvious. It's the ones that are a little more insidious that it's not so obvious, but still super, super important. And any sort of theft, any sort of like clear dishonesty or any sort of clear attitude that approaches real disrespect or any sort of aggression, boom, gone, can't even be here. It's not allowed. But I would say that it's the insidious, like less than obvious behaviors that you just have to fast track your termination because it can be a sit down. This is what I noticed. This is why it's wrong. And then if they exhibit it one more time, and again, these can be like seemingly minor dishonesties, maybe like intense sort of sarcasm that is biting, right? is maybe it's not complete disrespect, but it's approaching that. These are the things, hey, you're really harming other people's sort of attitude because you're the way that you're coming across to them. So those are the ones that are actually more dangerous. And I like your framing is like firing is not failure. It's yeah, maybe you hired wrong, but everybody's putting on their best self for hiring. So you're always they're going to slip through. These people are going to slip through, but they will show themselves eventually. And that's the most important thing is that you stay on top of it. Yeah. So obvious things are obvious. They're going to steal from you. They're going to steal all the time. If they're going to exhibit behaviors of dishonesty, they're going to be dishonest all the time. If they're going to exhibit behaviors of lack of respect, they're going to not respect you. They're not going to respect your customers or your coworkers, your employees. So those are the ones I would really watch for.
Yeah, I believe it was you that told me that. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that said, if you're willing to steal for me, you're willing to steal from me. How would you think if you heard one of your purchaser just bragging about, hey, I got all this food for free because I said it was damaged, but it wasn't, or things that are just clear ethics violations towards not necessarily towards your business, but for your business or something like that?
That's a really good example. And I do believe that. I think we have inherent personality traits. And if they think stealing is doing something good for you, it's like it won't be long before they steal from you. And the truth comes, hey, the hard truth is if you are an owner and that's your attitude, do not be surprised when people steal from you, right? If you're cheating on your taxes or you're stealing from your vendors in some way, I hope this is not the case. This is not the environment for that. But if you've seen other people who operate their businesses in that way, I would not be surprised if employees end up stealing from that type of owner because this is again almost like not what you say that you expect, but what you tolerate, or let's say the way that you act in that case. Yeah. If you tolerate a buyer who somehow cheats a deal against a vendor, they have very little respect and understanding of the right way to do things. And I would not be surprised if ultimately they take advantage of you.
So I think 4 signs you could clearly state that are clear signs that you need to let somebody go would be 1, that behavior has not changed after clear coaching and documented warnings. 2, the attitude is affecting your best people. So if you have your A team coming to you and saying, I just don't think person A is getting it, anything like that. They're disengaged, they're pulling back, or they're telling you that something is wrong. 3, you feel relieved on their days off. They're just not in the building and you just like, I don't have to worry about this person today. That feeling is information too. 4, you have coached them twice. The improvement lasts for maybe a couple days, a week, or like you said, a couple weeks, and then they just slide back. So those would be 4 signs to me that clearly we just have to part ways. It's not going to change and we've done everything that we can to try and get them on the same boat. You've used the phrase hire slow, fire fast throughout this series. When you have seen owners wait too long to make the call, what does that actually cost them?
Yeah, there's a joke I heard of friends of mine who owned a business. They always said, no one ever said, oh, I wish I waited longer to fire that person. When you finally get up the guts and the mentality, and you're like, ah, I got to let that person go, and you do it, and it feels better. No one's, I wish I waited 6 more months to fire that person. So that part of the hire slow, fire fast, but it is difficult. It takes a lot of mental energy to fire somebody. You want to do the right thing and coach them properly. The costs can be enormous. Mostly it is in the morale because if, especially it's affecting front staff, whether you know it or not, that is affecting your relationship with customers. That's one of the major costs. Obviously, if it's a bad actor and you're justifying behaviors, there's other potential costs, right? If they're taking things from the office, they're taking stuff from the store, they're giving their friends discounts. It's like there's real hard costs in money, but unfortunately, it's the hardest thing to see that costs the most. And that is the damage to the attitude of your best staff. And that's reflected in the conversations with your customers. That's the real cost that damages over a long period of time. The other hard cost, soft cost that lasts a long time is you might end up with multiple bad employees because you did not fix one bad employee. And that becomes an exponential spreading of this bad attitude. And that can be really hard to fix. If you get 30% of your employees start going bad attitude, you're going to need a reckoning to shift things. And that can be extremely difficult to do. And that has a very long implications to right the ship if you let it go that far.
Yeah, a few tips I'd say to firing somebody well and respectfully. Definitely doing it privately, directly. It's not a negotiation, it's not therapy session, so sometimes it can devolve into that. I've had a couple that kind of went into therapy sessions, and it was my fault for not cutting it off and one protecting myself from that because that is not who I am. I'm not your therapist. I understand you might need that, but I gotta protect my own mental space. It's not like a guilt trip on me or anything like that. Leading with clarity and not cruelty. It being clear is very hard for me when it's an uncomfortable conversation. I feel like I'm beating around the bush half the time. And it's always great practice when I'm like, I gotta just say what I need to say. Not over explaining or apologizing excessively, because at the point at which you're terminating somebody, you should have already pretty much reached the clear guidelines and what the expectations were. There's really no reason for you to apologize other than, "Sorry, it didn't work out." Simple. It just creates confusion and kind of weird false hope. Understanding that any kind of follow on, if you're gonna do an exit interview of any kind, having their final pay, all that kind of clearly written out in the termination letter so that they know what to expect if they're still gonna get their paycheck, if they're gonna get a paper paycheck, direct deposit, if anything changes there. And like some of the harder ones, like with the gentleman, I had to let it go a gentleman that just he seemed like he really wanted to be here, but for his own personal reasons, like he couldn't handle the noise of the dogs, he couldn't handle the noise of the dryers, and it was just a really hard but I was like, "For your benefit, I think you need a position that doesn't have this much external, like, hearing stimulation. I don't think this is the right role for you, the right fit, and I want you to go find what does fit you, so that you are happy." Wishing them well, actually meaning it. Most people who are wrong from their store are right for someone else. Dave, for someone who has never fired anyone before or is dreading it, like, sort of new business or they put off one that they really need to do, what would you tell them about the other side of that conversation? What does the store actually feel like for the weeks after a hard call gets made?
Is to know, which is you're relieved on their days off. So imagine the next 6 months or 2 years of not having that gut wrenching feeling of, oh, this person's going to be here. Right. So it's multiple things on the other side. Build yourself up, steel yourself to the process. You're going to have to do it. Right. This is a really good question because if you can imagine the other side is mental space for yourself, that person is sapping your energy because you're spending way more time thinking about it, feeling the feelings, knowing that you should do it and you're still not doing it. That goes away, right? The instant you pull the trigger and you're done with it, the dread of doing it is gone, right? Oh, and then the other positive thing is that individual's no longer there. So whatever energy they were sapping that you had to talk to your spouse about it, you had to talk to your friend about it. Oh my God, this person's doing this stuff. And everybody's saying, hey, you know what? You probably want to let them go. And you're like, yeah, I know, but it's just the personal energy shift for yourself is going to be a relief. And if you can imagine that, right? So that's important because it's you, it's your mental space, it's the way that you feel, the way that you approach going into work, knowing that this person that was a problem is no longer there. But again, we've talked about the impact on other staff members. It is, again, very difficult to understate how important feels some relief. They will feel 10 times more relief because they don't have control, right? You have the control. You're the one responsible for moving them out of your business. They just have to live with it or move on to get away from it. So you don't want them to move on. I would say the biggest thing that is best on the other side is the intangible. It's the energy shift that occurs when you move someone that shouldn't be there out of the space, both with yourself, your energy, your mental space, where you're going to focus your energy. And then with your best staff that's left is it's an unbelievable feeling of relief, really is what it is. When you do the thing that you know you should be doing, but you're avoiding it and you're pushing it off. So it's better times are coming. Commit yourself to the process, document it, and go forward with it, you will feel so much better. Your staff will appreciate the guts that it takes to do it, and they'll appreciate that bad energy no longer being in your store.
Yeah, the way you let someone go says a lot about how your culture is as the way you bring somebody in. So do it with dignity, be decisive, and be compassionate for sure. So to wrap up the topic, I think a couple of questions you can ask yourself right now just to see how you're doing when it comes to these kind of performance conversations. Is there a performance conversation you have been avoiding and try to have it this week? Just rip the band-aid off. Is there an employee you are relieved is not on the schedule when they don't show up or they're not there that day? That feeling is probably telling you something. Are your performance expectations written down anywhere, or do you have a written handbook that states what you expect? And then also, do you have a written performance review that's based off your core values and the expectations you have of your staff? Is your discipline process consistent across the board? Is it written out in that handbook? Everyone in your store knows what the expectation is and what the repercussions are if you don't have that, if you don't follow those kinds of guidelines. And when someone leaves your store by choice or yours, do they leave with dignity intact, or did you yell at them in the front staff area and just say, "Get out of here, you're fired"? That you don't want that you don't want people to perceive you that way. You want to have that closed door conversation with compassion. Dave, we've spent about 4 weeks on leadership, specifically when it comes to hiring, training, retention, and now this conversation. If you could leave any pet retailer with one thing that they could do differently starting tomorrow when it comes to managing their people, what would it be?
First thing that comes to mind, Tiff, is when it looks easy, the hard work's already been done. It doesn't mean it is easy, right? But being easy is the outcome of all of the stuff that we've talked about, right? So that is building your, so how to put it simple to somebody who's new or needs to hire or needs to fire is the systems are the hard work that make everything else easy, right? So the systems are your hiring avatar, your training systems, your coaching and discipline processes. It's going to take you time to put this stuff together, right? That's the hard work. Once the hard work's done, everything gets easier because you've got, see, it's like basically you do the mental work once and you put it in a system that operates over and over again. If you don't do that, you do the mental work over and over again. And that's the hard. Okay, these conversations are hard when we go to fire somebody. I'm not sure who I'm looking for when I'm going to hire somebody. So I would say all of the stuff we talked about is important, but it's mostly important from the point of do the hard work now. Think about the business that you want in the future. Build the system that will result in the business that you want. Think of it like working out, right? Is if you just go to the gym willy nilly and you're not really sure what you're doing, you're not going to get good results over a long period of time. But if you have some coach you, or if you have a system that you put together yourself for, like you said, if AI puts a workout together for you and you know exactly what you want and what you're going to do when you go to work out, your results are going to be way easier because you're just following a system. And that's what I would say is for managing people and building an organized process around those people that you need to manage all the way from hiring, onboarding, training, coaching, disciplining, firing, develop what you want, do the hard work up front, and everything else gets easier from there.
The stores that build great teams are not the ones where nothing ever goes wrong. They're the ones that, when problems arise, they get addressed honestly, quickly, and with respect for everyone in the room. And that's a skill, and skills can be worked on, skills can be grown, and it gets easier as you practice it. Dave, I want to thank you for helping me with this topic. I know it's talking about people is the hardest part about business. But if you missed any of the conversations we had around leadership, hiring, onboarding, building a team and retention programs, and then this conversation, I will link them below and in the classroom for you if you're in school. But next week, we are jumping into an entirely different topic of digital presence. We're going to be covering how to build and improve your e commerce operations. We're going to have a guest speaker for that one who Teresa from the Hungry Puppy is going to be with us. She's going to talk about her e-com business and delivery service. And then for the rest of June running online ads, whether it's through Google or social media, where we'll talk about lead capture, how to build your list and your customer base, and then also delivery and local fulfillment, and is it worth it for your store is gonna be the final topic on that digital presence. And again, we'll have Teresa in for that conversation as well. But thank you, Dave, for doing this with me, and we'll see you guys next week.